Good afternoon, Sean Carlson, Blackjack 98 Enterprises. Today's date is Saturday, October the 5th, around quarter to 2 p.m., 2024. For those of you that are having problems adjusting your carburetor on your small engine, you might be surprised to find out that there are other issues that are attached to your carburetor which you may not realize that are affecting your adjustment. Now we're talking about small engines like a weed whacker, a blower, a generator, a lawnmower, a hedge trimmer, edge trimmer, anything that is 100 cubic centimeters and under. So I got the paperwork behind me. We're going to look at that, and I'm going to explain to you what it is that you could be facing that you might not know about. So let me turn my camera around. All right, you can put this picture on pause if you want, but this is what we're going to be talking about. So when it comes to your small engine, you've got a lot of components that are not just always the carburetor. You've got the air filter, you've got the cylinder and the piston, you've got the muffler, and you've got the fuel tank. Okay, so when it comes to your fuel system, this is an example of what a fuel system can look like if the primer bulb is separate from the carburetor. When you have a carburetor like this, you only have two lines, which are those right there. The bottom one here is usually a thicker in diameter, and that goes to the fuel filter. The top one is usually a little bit longer and smaller in diameter, and that has to do with the return from the primer bulb. The same thing works with here when you are dealing with a separate primer bulb. If any of you are wondering where would you ever see a separate primer bulb, let me show you. This here is an example of a separate primer bulb. The carburetor is always attached to the air filter, and there's three lines when you're dealing with a separate primer bulb. I have only seen this on a Ryobi and these Poulons or McCullochs. When it comes to diagnosing the problems that you could be having with your carburetor, we're going to go through this checklist here. So let's start off with the fuel. When you read the operator's manual, and you absolutely do need to read the operator's manual, the fuel, whether it's mixed or not, needs to be mixed to the manufacturer's recommendation. Some just say regular, which is regular 87 in Vancouver, Canada. That's where I am. Certain ones, like Still, say that you need 90 or higher. Okay, so 90 octane or higher. In some cases it's called Supreme, in some cases it's called Superior, Premium, whatever. So this is our diagram. This is the fuel tank. This is either mixed gas or straight gas. On a small engine, on a 2-cycle small engine, it will always be mixed gas. So the problems that we can have with the fuel tank have to do with the fuel mixture going into the carburetor. So if it's the wrong mixture, if it's straight gas on a 2-cycle, it's not going to work. It's going to score the piston and the cylinder, and it's going to rust them together. If you use straight gas in a carburetor, you can seriously damage a cylinder and a piston, when you use straight gas. That's why you use mixed gas, because for the friction between the piston and the cylinder, the oil and the mixed gas creates that lubrication. The filter absolutely needs to be cleaned, replaced, inspected, because this lets the gas into your carburetor. Okay, now looking at this diagram, the gas flows from your filter through the fuel line, goes into the carburetor, and then leaves the carburetor and goes into the shorter end of the separate primer bulb, into the primer bulb, and then leaves out the longer end. When you have a separate primer bulb, or any primer bulb, like this carburetor for example, it will either be half full or it'll be like so full, like there's a little tiny bubble up top. Not a big deal. But this diagram has to be how you hook up a fuel system with three lines. 1, 2, 3. Okay? And I want to show everybody something very specific about this. You see how I got little points right there? Those have to do with the hole in the fuel tank. Certain holes are either 4.5 millimeters or 4 millimeters. And that could be this hole or this hole. Now, you need to use a fuel line, which is bigger in diameter, to ensure that there's a nice tight seal into the gas tank. Otherwise, gas will come out of these areas here on both sides of the fuel. There's going to be a hole and it'll leak out, okay? And you don't want that. So you got to use a thicker fuel line to squeeze through the hole, but not that thick that you can't pull it out, okay? So be very mindful that those two sizes with regards to those holes. Sometimes, not all the times, is this the case, okay? So after you're done that, look at the fuel lines. Certain fuel lines will crack and crumble, and the fuel lines that I use in my arsenal are these ones here, the yellow ones. I get these from online. They come in different dimensions. There's also clear ones, whatever. The manufacturer's fuel lines can crumble, and you could replace it with those ones. This is an example of either the primer bulb being attached or separate. Okay, so I drew the picture for the one that is attached. The one that is separate right there is the one that I drew right over here. Now, your fuel air valve. A fuel air valve is using the outside atmospheric pressure to push the gas down through the fuel filter into your carburetor. Now, when you're pressing your primer bulb up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down, you actually are sucking the gas out, and you need air to come in. There's two situations where you might have an air valve. One is in a gas cap. Situation B, this one right here. Otherwise, it's going to be A, and it's going to be directly attached to the fuel tank. Okay, so it'll be either a duckbill valve, a filter, or some other type of thing. But you absolutely need air to go into the gas tank for the fuel to flow into your carburetor. If this is blocked, you're not going to have proper fuel flow, and your carburetor will die on you. It'll bog on you. It'll sputter because there's no air getting in to push the fuel through the fuel line. Okay, that is one of the things that you need is a fuel air valve. Now we're going to talk about the air filter. It needs to be cleaned and replaced. This is the air filter. Air comes from outside, cleans through the fuel filter, goes through the gaskets into the carburetor, into the cylinder and the piston. Okay? Just like that. Air goes through all of these before it gets into the cylinder and the piston. Now, your air filter, if it's dirty, will not let all the air, and you need to have a clean air filter in order for you to do a proper carburetor adjustment. Okay? Now, some do have air filters, some do not have air filters. You absolutely need to have one. If it's missing, you need to put it in, otherwise dirty air will get into the carburetor and debris will enter into the cylinder and the piston, and it's not hard because that throat right there, as you can see, is big enough for even like a small pebble to get through the choke valve. See, if I was to put this on wide open, you can see daylight right through there. Okay, so a piece of debris can get through the carburetor into the cylinder and piston and score the hell out of it. That's why you need an air filter. Next thing that we want to look at is the muffler. The screen arrestor could be clogged, blocked, there could be air gaps or melted parts. Now, because of the fact that the piston is going up and down, up and down, up and down, this entire thing is getting so freaking hot, it is unbelievable. It is hot enough to melt the parts here. It is hot enough to melt the parts here. It is especially hot enough to melt these parts here. This here can either be the heat shield or the gasket. So, shield or gasket. Sometimes both, sometimes one. I have seen one or the other, and I have seen both of them at the same time. Your muffler has a little screen that is attached to the muffler, and if this is clogged, there will be no proper airflow leaving the muffler. and all the hot air will get backed up to the carburetor, which will get backed up to the air filter. You'll get backfire simply because of the screen arrestor or something in the muffler or something here is clogged up. Okay, so in order to do a proper carburetor adjustment, your muffler needs to be looked at, cleaned, replaced, or whatever. The next thing that we're going to talk about is the gaskets and the seals. They cannot have tears, deformed parts, missing parts, but they can have glue on both sides. Now let's talk about that. The gaskets. This here represents a gasket, this here represents a gasket, and this here represents a gasket. There's 3, sometimes more, okay? Now, what a gasket does is it ensures the seal between the carburetor and the piston when air is coming in. It also ensures that there's a seal when their air is leaving out. Okay, it is very extremely crucial that this one in particular, this gasket, regardless of how it looks, it cannot have any cracks or tears in it, because if there is extra air coming in through the outside in any of these openings, that will affect the air going into the cylinder and the piston and will affect your high and low jet setting when it comes to adjusting your carburetor. Sometimes there is or is not a gasket or a seal between the air filter and the carburetor. It's actually optional. I have seen parts diagrams where there is a gasket or a seal, and sometimes there is not. Sometimes, because this gets so hot, the cylinder and the piston, it creates air and heats everything up here. And sometimes there is a shield from in this area right here, which covers everything. It covers the gas tank so it doesn't get hot, depending on the configuration of the tank, the carburetor, and the primer bulb. The big thing is, when your engine is going, it's getting hot. You need a shield here and you need a shield here, which protects these outer components on the outside of it, especially your carburetor. Now, having said all that, once you have diagnosed everything else attached to your piston cylinder, then you can go ahead and do your carburetor adjustment. Okay, now that is as far as I can go, but not everything has to do with your carburetor. Your high jet on your carburetor will always be closest to your air filter. Your low jet on your carburetor will always be closest to the cylinder. This is the idle. Okay, now this picture once again is a diagram of this one in particular. Please pay attention to which goes where when you press your primer bulb and you're taking it apart. Sometimes on a cheap Chinese knockoff like this one here, these nibs are the same diameter, the same length, whatever. Okay, on a name brand carburetor, they will be different sizes. Your jets are different sizes depending on the length, diameter, and thread pitch. Okay, those are the 3 things which determine which goes where on a name brand carburetor. Okay, on a cheap Chinese knockoff, they will be like the same length, the same diameter, and the same thread, but the heads will be different. The heads will be different, and when we talk about the heads of a carburetor, we're talking about on a microscopic scale where this is the threads, and you got a really little tiny head on the end, and that looks like that. Now, on certain other ones, there's a little shaft which is attached, and then there's the little head. Okay, certain ones have a shaft that is longer and some that are shorter. Okay, some do have heads, some don't. Pay attention to this in particular. Okay, on name brands only. On cheap Chinese knockoffs, you'll never have this problem. They'll be the same ones. They're interchangeable. These cannot be interchangeable, otherwise that will have a lot to do with your carburetor adjustment. Now, Let's look at this carburetor here. This is a cheap Chinese knockoff. This is what it looks like when it comes to you. So if you can tell, they almost look like they're the same. One looks like it could be thicker or thinner than the other one, but there's no brand name. There's no numbers etched onto it. There's nothing anywhere. Okay, this is cheap. It does work, but it might not work as well as a name brand carburetor, and you need to pay attention to that. So, having said all of that and looking at all these pictures, you know what, let's go look at this one just a little bit more clearly. On your primer bulb, there's a separate one. This one's longer, this one is shorter. I want to let everybody know you cannot interchange these, because when you suck the gas in, it has to go through the carburetor from the bigger end. On a name brand, there'll be a bigger one. On a smaller one, it'll be a thinner one. And the fuel flow, as described in the arrows, it needs to go this direction. You cannot push the fuel through the bottom and then out this end into the return. Does not work that way. It needs to work exactly as you have it pictured here. Now, your return line, remember, pay attention to the diameter of the holes when it comes to where your fuel is coming out of. Also pay attention to the air valves, okay? So, everything that I have explained here, I did my very best to explain it to you. So, hold on. So, this is all coming from experience when it comes to the engine, small engine world, repairs. I do buy my own products and fix them and sell them, and then I advertise myself out to the world on Facebook and Craigslist. And I do have success with rebuilding engines. I have done about 12 weed whackers, 1 chainsaw, 2 hedge trimmers, a generator, a 4,000 watt generator, an Eaton Beamer scooter. I've done a lawnmower. Yeah. So when it comes to repairing a carburetor, I find that there's other outlying issues, not just the carburetor, but everything that is attached to it. And I wanted to share this information with you guys because maybe not a lot of other people do that on videos, and everybody exhausts the hell out of rebuilding a carburetor, but not diagnosing everything else that is attached to it. I hope this video helps you all, and I'm looking forward to positive comments only. I am in Vancouver, Canada, and looking forward to hearing and seeing from you guys in all my other videos that you watch. Sean Carlson with Blackjack 98 Enterprises. Have a good day.